We begin in Ukraine, where a combined Russian missile and drone attack has struck multiple locations in the capital, Kyiv. Officials there say a child was among at least 6 people killed, while dozens of others were injured. Residential buildings, schools and hospitals are said to have been hit.
Early morning in the Ukrainian capital. This residential neighbourhood was one of multiple locations hit by the deadly barrage of Russian drones and missiles. A terrifying ordeal for those caught up in the attack. There was a second air raid alert. I got up, took my phone, and saw 5 cruise missiles were headed for Kyiv. I tried to wake up my wife, but then there were explosions, and that was it. Our daughter is now in the hospital. I don't have windows left in my kitchen, but I came out here to help. I was lying down when I heard something flying. I dropped to the floor and the wall collapsed on me. More than 300 drones and 8 missiles were launched overnight, according to Ukraine's president. Entire residential buildings were destroyed and schools and hospitals were also damaged. Several people were killed and dozens wounded. Rescuers searched through rubble for survivors. In a lengthy post on X, Volodymyr Zelensky called them showcase killings and called on America and Europe to help, writing, "Peace without strength is impossible, but forcing Moscow to make peace, compelling them to come to a real negotiating table, all the tools needed for this are in the hands of our partners." Russia's latest deadly assault comes after US President Donald Trump issued a 10-day ultimatum for Moscow to halt its war in Ukraine or face further sanctions. In the meantime, Ukrainians suffer the daily consequences of Moscow's war on their country.
DW correspondent Rebecca Ritters is in Kyiv. She has more details about the attacks on the Ukrainian capital and elsewhere across the country.
Well, Barrage, it was a very scary, very loud and very dangerous night in Kyiv last night. In the capital, there were 27 areas that were struck by drone and missile fire. And I'm standing at the site of one of those strikes. This is where, as you can see behind me, a residential building was completely destroyed. And as you just mentioned, a 6-year-old child has been killed, and that has happened in this apartment building. Just before we came on air, we saw emergency workers removing another body in a bag. A total of 4 people have been confirmed to have been killed at this site, and as of a short while ago there are still 10 people unaccounted for. This isn't, as I mentioned, the only site across the capital. It was really, really loud. Everybody across the city had a pretty sleepless night last night. We could hear and even see the air defence at work, and I myself saw a couple of the impacts, obviously from a great distance, but of those missile strikes. It was very, very close, very loud and very scary for residents here. Some of the people that we've spoken to say that even these surrounding buildings have been largely destroyed, if not completely, then certainly the windows have been blown out. We look around and dozens of apartments have been affected. It's not simply that building behind. Hundreds of residents will be looking for somewhere else to stay. We've spoken to many who say they just don't know what they're going to do now.
And what are Ukrainian officials saying in all this?
Well, President Zelensky and the Foreign Minister, Andrei Sabiha, have come out with pretty strong statements in response to last night's attack. Both of them have come out calling for peace through strength, singing from the same songbook there. President Zelensky saying that they have to force, everyone has to force Moscow to peace, that he doesn't want to make peace, he won't make peace without being forced, and that all the tools are there available for him, for people to be putting force on there. It's very chaotic here, I apologise. Andrei Sabiha said it's really time to make him feel pain and the consequences of his choices. So we're hearing very loud language coming out from the leaders here who are calling on allies to really, really keep ramping up the pressure on President Putin. As we know, as we've seen in the past, he doesn't respond to any kind of pressure, and many people have been saying in the lead up to this attack that since President Trump made his announcement that he would be shortening his deadline for President Putin to 10 days, that we would be seeing more attacks, and that certainly looks like what we've been seeing here overnight.
We'll leave it there for the moment. DW correspondent Rebecca Ritters in Kyiv. Thanks very much. Let's get some analysis now from Fabrice Potier. He's a political and military expert and a CEO at Rasmussen Global, an international political consultancy firm. Fabrice, welcome. Russia appears to be increasing the intensity of air attacks on Ukraine. What is its aim there?
Well, I think it's fulfilling different aims in a pretty sinister way. One is to exert significant pressure on the Ukrainian population and the leadership, and trying to divide also the population from the Ukrainian leadership, or to push Zelensky to accept further compromise when and if there is ever a negotiation. Second, I think it's a way for Vladimir Putin to show that he's willing to maximize his military pressure, and he's not going to be abated by a threat of US sanctions. And finally, maybe this is a slightly more optimistic interpretation, it might be his way to, again, build a very strong position from a military point of view, shows that he has the means to exert pressure, so that if and when there is a negotiation, he will do that from a position of strength. But just to finish on this, I think it also shows a certain level of desperation, quite frankly, however sinister it is, because it is known in warfare that you cannot achieve or win a war by just missile attacks. So I think it shows that I think the Russians are running out of significant options on the, let's say, the more traditional military front line, and therefore they are kind of investing in a more less traditional front line, which is the air campaign against the civilian population. That shows that they're also, I think, limited in their military options on the ground.
Right. I do want to talk to you about what's happening on the ground, and particularly the front lines. I mean, you described the Russian response as desperation. We're talking about 300 drones and 8 missiles being fired overnight. Is Ukraine's air defense proving strong enough to counter these attacks?
Of course not. And this is, I think, the key issue that is being negotiated right now between Ukraine, the Europeans, and the Americans. The US administration since February has started to stop delivery of military aid, including the famous Patriot interceptors. So I understand that this has resumed, but obviously you have delay, and the air defense systems have been considerably weakened by the Trump administration. So they are playing catch up now, and hopefully in the next few weeks, the Ukrainians will be able to have a much more successful air defense systems over the big cities. So that's one thing. I'm saying desperation because it shows that Putin is not achieving his overall aim. We should remember what he tried to do, which is to take over the whole of Ukraine. And from a military point of view, he's stuck since 2 years. Even if the Russians are making tactical advances on the front line, they're not making a strategic breakthrough. And I think it's just his way to keep the pressure without necessarily achieving major objectives.
Yeah, but then in a war in which nobody appears to be making strategic breakthroughs, Russia appears to be capturing ground, because there are reports now that Russia has captured the town of Chasiv Yar in Donetsk, for example. I mean, what does that tell us about Russian overall strategy? If they're not being able to make strategic breakouts, what are they trying to do?
Well, I think what it tells us is that the Russians are willing to sacrifice 1,000 of their soldiers a day to gain a few tens of kilometers in the base case scenario. So you can obviously look at that as Russia is still on the advance, which is correct, and the Ukrainians are playing defense. But you can also look at that as this is a huge investment for very, very little gain, which is not of strategic importance. So yes, there is a territorial loss, a small loss, but still one, you're right. But I think the Russians are not achieving their aim. So we have to focus, we, the Europeans and the Ukrainians, on keeping the control part of the Ukrainian territory as safe and as resilient as possible. That's why air defense is important. That's where equipping them with drone technology to be able to actually extend the kill zone and deny the Russians the capacity to make small advances on the front line.
So now in the middle of all of this, you have the Ukrainian foreign minister calling for, quote, maximum pressure on Russia. Donald Trump has also threatened Russia with new sanctions, giving him about 10 to 12 days to come to the negotiating table. Will all of this work on Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think clearly what we have done so far has not been good enough to work. So we definitely have to do much more. And we have to do much more in different domains. One is economic sanctions, because it does matter. He's having his economy on steroid, spending 10% of his GDP in the war economy. So he needs to have revenues. And oil and gas remain the main source of revenue. So to constrain that is obviously important, but that's not going to be enough. I think one other axis is the military domain, where the Ukrainians should be given more means, including the Taurus cruise missile, to be able to strike deeply on the Russian territory against the factories producing the drones, against the airfields where the Russian aircraft take off to be able to deliver cruise missiles or glide bombs. So we need to be also bolder on the military front. And I think in Germany, the SPD has to stop blocking the Merz government's promise to be able to provide Taurus cruise missiles to the Ukrainian government.
Always a pleasure talking to you, Fabrice. Fabrice Pottier, the political and military expert. Thanks so much.